Some of the material in this video is disturbing. There will be some graphic descriptions of the sickening crime that Andrea Yates committed in 2001, as well as some descriptions of what police encountered when they arrived at her home.
She murdered her children one by one, drowning them all in the family bathtub, locking the door so the 5 children couldn't get out of the house, waiting until her husband left to avoid detection, fighting to hold each one of the children under the water. The children's bodies bruised, struggling to live. So how was Andrea Yates found not guilty?
Sadly, everything said by Nancy Grace in this clip is accurate. I don't know about the front door of the Yates house, but court testimony confirms that the French doors at the rear of the house were locked and could not be opened from inside the house without a key. And yes, Yates did wait until her husband was gone before she drowned all 5 of her children. Andrea Yates also told police that each child struggled as she held them underwater, and there were bruises, at least some of which were likely caused during the murders. In this video, we're going to take a look into Andrea Yates' mind in order to try to understand exactly what was going through her head when she decided to murder all 5 of her children. And we're going to do this by looking at her thoughts through the viewpoint of one of the psychiatrists who actually testified for the defense in both of the Andrea Yates trials. And near the end of this video, we'll also address the role that Rusty Yates played in all of this and whether or not he should have been put on trial as well. Sources and additional case notes are available at grimsilence.com, and if you like how I present this case, please be sure to help the channel out by liking and subscribing. For those who aren't familiar with this case, let's begin by covering the major points that led up to the day that Andrea Yates became a murderer. There was a time when Andrea Yates, then Andrea Kennedy, seemed to have it all. She was the captain of her high school swim team, the valedictorian of her high school class of more than 600 students, a member of the National Honor Society, and she went on to become a highly regarded registered nurse at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. And then, at the age of 29, Andrea Kennedy married Russell Yates. Mr. Yates, better known as Rusty, worked for NASA and would later be called controlling, critical, and demanding by those close to Andrea. Rusty, according to court testimony, had some very strong religious beliefs, and he believed that wives should submit to their husbands. Rusty wanted a big family, and Andrea was on board. Together, they openly proclaimed that they would have as many children as nature, or perhaps God, would provide. And have children they did. Less than a year after their wedding, Andrea gave birth to their first child, Noah, in 1994. Shortly after Noah's birth, Andrea hallucinated a vision of a knife and her stabbing somebody. Andrea then gave birth to John, the Yates' second child, in December of 1995. In the fall of 1996, the family relocated to Florida for a short-term NASA-related project that Rusty had agreed to work on. And this led the family to rent out their house in the suburbs of Houston. They bought a 38-foot RV that they would drive to Florida and live in, and the family would eventually trade in the RV for a 350-square-foot Greyhound bus that Rusty bought from Michael Warrenecki, a fire and brimstone traveling evangelist that he was fond of. In September of 1997, Andrea Yates gave birth to Paul, the 3rd Yates child. And even despite the Yates' growing family, Rusty decided that they would continue living the quote-unquote light and easy lifestyle of living in a home with wheels. In 1998, they sold the home they had been renting out and fully committed to living in the bus. The Yates' 4th child, Luke, was born in February of 1999. And yes, the family was still living in the bus. A few months later, in June, Andrea Yates had a nervous breakdown. She called Rusty and told him to come home, which he did, and he arrived to find her shaking, crying, and biting her fingers. She wasn't biting her nails, she was biting her fingers. This prompted Rusty to place Andrea at her parents' house, where the very next day she attempted to end her own life by overdosing on her father's prescription medication. It's also worth noting that Andrea's father's health was failing because he was suffering from Alzheimer's, and this will become important later. Following this suicide attempt, Andrea Yates was hospitalized in Methodist Hospital's psychiatric unit, and over the course of the summer of 1999, Yates would again attempt suicide, be placed on various medications, enter and exit another psychiatric treatment facility, and her mental state would experience an overall decline. During this time, Andrea revealed that she was having visions and hearing voices that told her to hurt others, hence her second attempt at suicide. In August of 1999, Rusty, at the insistence of Andrea's parents, moved the family into a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in a residential neighborhood. Raising the Yates' 4 children in a house rather than a bus was apparently just what Andrea needed, and for a while, she was doing great. She was swimming laps in the morning, baking and sewing, she was playing with the children. Life was good. Just over a week after the Yateses moved into their new home, the psychiatrist treating Andrea Yates, this was a Dr. Eileen Starbranch, this doctor warned the Yateses that giving birth again could trigger another psychotic episode. Her notes read, "Apparently, patient and husband plan to have as many babies as nature will allow. This will surely guarantee future psychotic depression." It's unclear whether she said these exact words to Rusty and Andrea Yates, but she certainly did warn them against having another child. In the spring of 2000, despite Dr. Starbranch's earlier warning, Andrea Yates was pregnant again. She gave birth for the 5th time to Mary in November. A few months later, in the spring of 2001, Andrea's father died. This is when Andrea's condition began to spiral out of control once again. Andrea Yates began showing psychotic symptoms. She believed that TV commercials were speaking directly to her, that her home was under the surveillance of TV cameras intended to monitor her mothering skills. And perhaps the most alarming delusion was her belief that Satan was literally within her. Andrea Yates kept these thoughts hidden from her family because she believed that Satan would use this information to force her to kill her children. By the time that Andrea Yates had drowned her 5 children, she had attempted suicide twice, she had been hospitalized for psychiatric reasons 4 different times, she had been on and off a carousel of medications, and she had experienced a number of truly disturbing hallucinations, some of which her husband, Rusty, was aware of, but for some reason, doctors were not. To give you an accurate picture of what police encountered at the Yates house on June 20th, 2001, I am going to read portions of the prosecution's closing argument from the first Andrea Yates trial. It will show some of the reasoning upon which their prosecution was based, as well as the horrors that the police officers discovered upon entering the Yates home. And once again, please be warned, some of this is graphic. Officer Knapp was the first one that arrived. He knocked on the door and said, "What's your emergency?" She looked him eye to eye, she being Andrea Yates. She looked him eye to eye and said, "I killed my kids." Not "I saved my kids," not "I am the great Satan and I need to be executed because of the cruel dilemma I have been in." "I killed my kids." And he was shocked. "What?" "I killed my kids." He told you that as he looked at the tile floor, he saw 2 sets of wet footprints because Noah tried to get away. Those little wet footprints in confusion as he saw his sister floating in the tub. No words of comfort, as Dr. Dietz told you, tried to get away. He got as far as the dining room table before she took him back into that room. And Officer Knapp told you she took him to the back bedroom where he saw a small little arm, Luke's arm, hanging out from the bed. The children completely covered. The defense has said, "Oh, well, let's look at Mary. She had her brother's arm cupped around her, this act of comfort, this act of love." That's no act of love. She didn't even tell Officer Knapp where Noah's body had been left floating in the vomit and feces and urine that had been expelled in the fright of the 4 that had gone in that tub before him. She didn't drain the water. She didn't put a pillow under his head. She didn't cover him up. Officer Stumpo tells you, I walked in there and I discovered Noah floating in the tub. And I walked over to her and I looked at her and I looked her eye to eye and I said, do you know what you have done? And she looked him eye to eye and said, yes. And she sat there in silence. Not that I've saved my children, I know what I have done. In 2002, Andrea Yates was found guilty of murdering her children, but she had not yet been sentenced. That verdict, however, was overturned when it was discovered that one of the psychiatrists who testified for the prosecution had made an erroneous statement. He had testified about an episode of Law and Order that showed a woman being found insane after drowning her children in a bathtub, but no such episode had ever aired. In 2006, Yates was tried again, and this time she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. In a televised interview, the jury foreman stated, we understand that she knew it was legally wrong, but in her delusional mind, we believed that she thought what she did was right. But how? How could anyone possibly believe that killing your children is the right thing to do? Dr. Philip Resnick was the primary forensic psychiatrist for Andrea Yates' defense team. In a paper titled The Andrea Yates Case, Insanity on Trial, Resnick explains, in 1999, Andrea Yates heard the voice of Satan telling her to stab her children. At this point in her mental decline, Yates felt that it was better to end her own life rather than risk harming her kids. It is likely that this thinking was heavily influenced by a verse from the Bible that was important to her. Luke chapter 17, verse 2. It would have been better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea than that he should cause one of the little ones to stumble. Yates felt that she had not been a good mother and would continue to cause her children to stumble, so she attempted suicide twice that year. However, when the psychosis returned in 2001, Andrea Yates came to believe that Satan wanted her children in hell. And to make matters worse, Yates believed that her kids really would go to hell because they were not righteous, something that she blamed herself for. So in Yates's twisted thinking, she believed that she could save her children from an eternity in hell by taking their lives while they were still young and innocent, thereby guaranteeing that they would go to heaven instead. And this is the main dilemma that formed in the tortured mind of Andrea Yates. Let her children live, and they would surely be condemned to hell at some point, but take their lives now, and they would go straight to heaven, no questions asked. For Yates, in her psychotic fog of delusions and hallucinations, ending her children's lives was the best thing she could do for them as a mother. In addition to saving her children from going to hell, Yates believed that the state of Texas would execute her for her actions. This fact alone certainly indicates that she knew that killing her children was wrong, but at the same time, she believed that Satan was actually inside her body, and if she were to be executed while Satan was inside her, then perhaps Satan would also be destroyed in the process. As for why Yates kept this psychotic thinking to herself, it would be reasonable to conclude that she wanted to conceal her plans so that she wouldn't be stopped. But Yates, at the time, was anything but reasonable. She believed that Satan could hear her words and use them against her. Therefore, she had to keep her plan a secret. Her children's souls depended on it. And that is how the 2006 jury arrived at not guilty by reason of insanity. Andrea Yates knew what she was doing, but she really believed that she was doing the right thing for her children. So now we get to Rusty Yates and the part that he played in all of this, and even to this day, comment sections about the Yates case are filled with remarks about how Rusty Yates should have been charged with a crime. Look, I get the outrage around Rusty Yates. I mean, the guy had a NASA salary. He was making good money, and yet for some reason, he insisted on having his wife raise their 4 children in a bus. At least for a while. It's ridiculous. And even if you're convinced that he really was a terrible, terrible husband, even if he was as selfish and controlling as he's been made out to be, even if he's the one who pushed Andrea Yates to have that fifth baby, Mary, against the advice of Dr. Starbranch, in the end, there's one fact that remains undisputed, which is that Rusty Yates lost his entire family on that one day. All 5 of his children died. So, personally, I think he's a victim. And I hope he's found peace in the 20 plus years that have passed since this tragedy took place. I would love to know what your thoughts are. Once again, I'm not defending what Rusty Yates may have done or some of the decisions that he might have made. Nor am I defending Andrea Yates's, literally insane thought processes. But please let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching, and if you would like to see more videos like this one, please be sure to subscribe.